Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the Werewolf Week of Monstober. Each week this month, I've been providing a recommendation video within each week's archetype about some stories that are worth checking out for each creature that we talk about. And for the Wolfman, I just have to talk about the 1941 Wolfman film, especially because you people insisted on choosing American Werewolf in London for our rewatch, which will be this Saturday night, and I'm very much looking forward to that. That's a great movie, and I have a lot to say about it. But it strikes me as such a shame that not many people really appreciate the classics anymore, and the 1941 Wolfman, as far removed from it as we are right now in culture and in technology and all of that, is such a classic story. And it really is a seminal story in the development of the Wolfman mythos. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Before I get to the Wolfman film, though, I do want to talk about the Werewolf of Paris novel that was written by Guy Endore in the early 30s, and I spoke about this a little bit on our live stream office hours talking about our favorite werewolf stories the other day. And this is a tragically underread novel nowadays. People, of course, link Dracula to Bram Stoker's Dracula and Frankenstein to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but not many people know that we do have a classic work of literature linked to the Wolfman as well. And there have been other treatments in literature, Wagner the Werewolf and different incarnations here and there, but the Werewolf of Paris really struck at the heart of the werewolf mythos. It's written in 1933, but it takes place in the late 1800s. It takes place during the Franco-Prussian War and the French Commune era. This is after the French Revolution, and there's still resonances of the Reign of Terror and whatnot going along. Our narrator is a young American who is studying for his PhD in Paris, and he comes across these documents that chronicle the life of this werewolf. And so much of the origin in the story and the creature that we come to know as the Wolfman is in this novel to begin with, because before this, the werewolf hadn't really been a solidified concept of its own. It was often conflated with vampires or with witches, for example, who might wear wolf pelts out to become wolves, shapeshifters in general, or something like that. But we see rather late in the history of horror the development of this quintessential Wolfman mythos. And the Werewolf of Paris contributes a lot to this. Bertrand Callier, the young werewolf in the book, develops an extreme hunger to devour meat and blood. But not only that, he also develops a strong sexual drive, and the two meet perfectly for him when he is patroning a prostitute, and she allows him to start to bite her and to be rough with her and whatnot. And of course he ends up injuring her quite a bit, and really crossing some creepy lines there. But that's the idea. That's a picture of part of the werewolf mythos, is that if the vampire has a sexual content to it in terms of a metaphor, the vampire bites your neck and sucks your blood as a metaphor for sexual penetration, the werewolf story is a more visceral sexual element to it, because the werewolf wants to consume his victim. And in an unhealthy sexual encounter, that's what the one dominant abusive person is going to try and do to the other one, consume them, emotionally, identity-wise, psychologically, and so on. So that's an element of the werewolf story. And the Werewolf in Paris novel also set up this theme, which is at the heart of all werewolf stories. We'll talk about it more when we reach our werewolf archetype video. But this theme is the conflict between order and chaos, between the rules of society and the primal carnal urges of man. And our American author, Guy Endore, contextualized that in France, and he had a lot of things to say about the political climate of France back then. But in a lot of ways, it's a uniquely American theme, a uniquely American idea, at least the way the conversation is typically had in werewolf stories. If France, for example, is to be blamed for the Reign of Terror and the French Revolution, then that falls back in some sort of resonance on the American Revolution, which inspired the French Revolution. And many American supporters at the time, some resonances of the philosophies, many that we still hold dear in America. So just that idea of the conflict between personal freedom and necessary restrictions of society, and where that falls with the carnal man and the civilized man. That's giving the novel short shrift, but I could do a much longer video just on it alone. But right now I just want to use it to set up the Wolfman. Now we have the Wolfman, the Universal picture that is released in 1941, and this is really at the end of that first cycle of Golden Age Universal films. Most people lump in Dracula's Daughter, which came shortly after, and that's the end of that initial Universal Golden Age cycle. But the Wolfman makes an essential step in the mythology. it's no longer a werewolf now, it is a wolf man. And in the film, Bela Lugosi plays a gypsy who is a werewolf, and we see him, once he's transformed, as an actual wolf walking on all fours who attacks Larry Talbot. Larry Talbot, then, who for all intents and purposes is an American, he is one of the Talbots. The Talbots are native to England there. He was born there, but he went off and left and spent so much time in America that he is thoroughly Americanized. And in Kurt Siodmak's original script, in fact, he was supposed to be an American mechanic coming to work on Mr. Talbot's telescope, so he wasn't even supposed to be a son in that original version of the script, but they changed it around. Still, as I said, for all intents and purposes, he is very American, and he is bitten by an old world werewolf, an old gypsy werewolf from the old country. And instead of becoming a werewolf, he becomes a wolf man. Why is that? Well, that's because the werewolf story is a story about the duality of man, and that's one of the things that the 1941 film, The Wolfman, sets up so well. It talks about the duality of man. It talks about the light and dark sides within every man. It doesn't matter how much of a good self-controlled person you are, as the saying goes. Even a man pure of heart who says his prayers by night can become this werewolf. And that's the real terror of it, and that's a real psychological terror, because everyone has a shadow to their psychology, as Jung would call it. And I'll talk about this more in the archetype video, but the more we try to control that shadow, the more we try to repress it and pretend it doesn't exist, the more it's going to unleash itself despite all of our machinations. And the werewolf is a perfect metaphor for that. And the 1941 Wolfman film develops that so well. We have Larry Talbot coming home to his old world home, chasing after the young Mary Conliffe that he meets in the village there, trying to balance his carnal urges with his civilized self, and not an evil person in the least bit, but once he is bitten, that shadow asserts itself. And that's the tragedy of the film. It is portrayed to perfection by Lon Chaney Jr., Claude Rains as the father, and there's another aspect of that too, in that the father, Claude Rains, is the one who ultimately kills the Wolfman in the end. And Claude Rains' character, Mr. Talbot, is a man of philosophy, a man of intellect, and this is the ultimate victory of order, of society, of intellect over the carnal, primal, Dionysian self in the Wolfman. Of course, that victory is not forever. The struggle is eternal between those two forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, as we see exhibited in the many sequels and the many other werewolf stories to follow. But it's a fascinating movie, and again, I could do a longer video really pulling out all of the nuances of the film. I still might do a live stream rewatch of this film to really go deeper into it. Maybe we'll do that next week, the week of Halloween, I don't know. But I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it or hasn't seen it in a while. It is available on Amazon Prime. You can purchase it for about $7. Of course, you can rent it for much cheaper on any platform. There are many wonderful DVD box sets and whatnot available as well. I also should mention the 2010 remake of the film by Joe Johnston, the director of Rocket Man and Captain America First Avenger. And this is not as good of a film as the 1941 version in terms of story. But it is a good film, and it's a better film than most people give it credit for. It makes a few purposeful changes to the story, which are gutsy and are interesting from a philosophical standpoint, but don't quite have the resonance, I think, as the original. For example, it tries to flip the generational conflict, and which side is the more self-controlling, restrictional one, which side is the more given to the primal and carnal and whatnot. I'll let you watch that for yourself if you decide to watch it. It is worth a watch. A great cast. And if nothing else, it is worthy of watching because it's one of the last films that Rick Baker worked on for monster makeup. Of course, Rick Baker, responsible for the phenomenal transformation scene of American Werewolf in London that we'll talk about on Saturday night. Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt. It's certainly worth a watch, but definitely not until you've seen the 1941 The Wolfman, Universal Pictures. We talked on the live stream Tuesday night about so many great werewolf stories out there. The Curse of the Werewolf, the Hammer horror film, was the closest to a live screen version that The Werewolf of Paris ever came to making it to the large screen, but it changed so much that it's fairly unrecognizable in many ways. But the classic Wolfman just has no parallel in the way it achieved what it set out to achieve. So go watch that this Halloween. It's cheap, it's obtainable, it's highly enjoyable, and definitely let me know what you think of it. Come back Saturday for the rewatch of American Werewolf in London. Stay tuned for the Werewolf Archetype video, which will come shortly, and a few catch-all videos that we have for the half week of next week until Halloween leading up to it. So good stuff planned. Of course, after that, back to the usual content of superheroes and heroic fiction. I have more Comicsgate reviews planned. Next on deck is Case File Arkham, which will be a lot of fun. Thank you to everyone who's liking the videos, following, sharing, subscribing. The links to my Patreon are in the description. I appreciate all of my patrons dearly. And until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the Halloween stories you love. Thanks for watching.